Any discussion of Adobe Illustrator really should begin with a discussion of Adobe Creative Cloud. And I suspect that most of you have already subscribed at the bargain basement price of $19.99, which is available through our partner here with Endicott College. And what does that allow you to do? Well, Creative Cloud allows you access to all of the wonderful products from Adobe, including Photoshop and InDesign, which we use in other situations. And each of these pieces of software are designed to have a kind of special thing that they can do. So as you might imagine, Photoshop handles photos and Illustrator handles illustrations. InDesign is typically page layout, more in a publishing vein. So if you're doing a multi-page document or a book or even a flyer, InDesign is great. They do all have similar tools, and we are going to review Adobe Illustrator's tools today. But what you'll find is that some of the vector graphic tools do show up in other pieces of software. However, they are kind of at their finest in Adobe Illustrator. I also find that I like other sorts of graphical features, including the ability to have different brushes, which look like hand-drawn drawings or other sorts of things, borders. I find that Illustrator has a much larger selection of those tools. Also text. I find text is a lot more fun in Illustrator, so if you're doing something interesting like we're going to be doing with our logos for an artist's gallery, Illustrator is the way to go. So here's the splash screen for Adobe Illustrator, and just to give you a quick overview, let's take a look at this tutorial that they have online that conveniently talks about simplifying your logo design process. It's really, I don't know, more of an advertisement for Illustrator than anything else. Anyway, but the big point is that drawing anything in InDesign, Illustrator is going to be a different experience than drawing in Photoshop because it is a vector drawing tool. And that's as opposed to Photoshop, which is a raster drawing tool. And vectors, let's go take a look down here. Vectors are different because what they are, they're basically tiny little algorithms that define the geometry of a line, and that includes how the line is displayed. Is it a pencil style line, or is it a solid black or solid red or green or dashed or what? Rasters are basically pixel based, so they're dots, itty bitty little dots, and you define what something looks like by defining those dots. So we will be doing vector drawing, and these are really handy because they can be scaled. They can be really easy to make a teeny tiny little logo that fits on a business card, and then you can expand it really infinitely as large as you want. The other thing that's nice about vector graphics is they're basically kind of AutoCAD style polylines, and you can grab grips on each of those lines, or handles as they're called here, and you can modify those very easily. There's all sorts of drawing tools that we'll go over quickly. Hopefully you'll remember many of them. Anyway, the other one that part of this that I really like is the typography tools. There's so many typography tools. You can use text in many different ways, and there's so many different kinds of text. And then you can also use it to mask other objects or put an image behind the text. There are really a lot of great tools in this software. You can also add and subtract simple shapes for a big impact. Yes, indeed, you can. What's nice about this is you can take some basic shapes or even freehand lines and use them to create other shapes, which are otherwise sometimes hard to draw. Arcs and things like that are generally fairly complicated to draw, but circles are easy. And each of these items, again, there are different tools for which allow you to either combine them or subtract pieces or whatever it is. Just knowing that the tools are there is actually the hardest part. Most of the tools are pretty easy to use. And then each thing that you draw has what's called a stroke and also a fill pattern so you can change what the lines look like and also what's inside them. The Adobe Illustrator interface is very similar to a lot of other drawing and modeling programs. First of all, there is a kind of menu bar where you have all these pull-down menus, File, Edit, some very specific to Adobe Illustrator. The window pull-down menu is usually where you find a lot of things like toolbars and palettes that can pop up. And there is over here what's called the workspace selector, and you can choose which sort of workspace you want depending on what you want to do. Now, my advice is don't go changing because you really want to just pick one and kind of run with it. Like, for instance, if you're an older user, you might be used to this Essentials Classic view where the properties is up, and then each of these palettes is kind of here as a quick flyout. I actually prefer this because I have a massive screen, external screen at home. And so I have the space, but if you prefer, you can go to Essentials, which just has a much more collapsed kind of view. In fact, there is even a mode called full screen mode under the view pull down menu. And then you basically don't have anything available at all. All you need to do is learn the letters that launch the different commands. I'll just hit escape to get back here. Anyway, each of these palettes is available here on the right. Just click on the name to get the properties of whatever object you've selected. The area over here, this blank white sheet of paper, is known as an artboard, and you can have multiple ones in a project, and often you do kind of collect together all elements of your project here. So, for example, if I was working on an architectural project, which we will be, you would want to have one artboard for your bubble diagram, and one for your block diagram, and maybe one for the icons you're planning to use on your board, and one for your logo. And each of those can be imported either into another Illustrator file or into an InDesign file. And that's what we'll do with our logo later on. Anyway, down at the bottom is the status bar that has things like your zoom. You can control numerically how much you're zoomed, or you can just fit the artboard onto your screen. Also, if any commands are active, it will tell you. So, for example, the selection tool is available right now, or is on now. Finally, you have the toolbar, which is over here on the right. And like all your other software, the toolbars are kind of customizable. So if you find you're using Illustrator a lot, you'll absolutely want to customize that. Finally, any tools that are active will probably have some kind of controls or options available. So these up here are the options for this particular tool. You'll want to keep an eye on that. And then the color selector, there is the foreground color and the background, or the stroke color, I'm sorry, the fill color and the stroke color, which you can click on like other programs and choose a color. And there's a number of different ways to pick colors, of course, because these are all very color sensitive programs like all Adobe software. And just to take a look at some of the different ways you interface, first of all, to zoom in and out, you can't just use your scroll wheel, because if you just use your scroll wheel, your page just goes up and down. If you hold down Alt, the Alt button, now when you scroll, you go in and out. And by the way, if you hold down Control and scroll, then you get left to right movement. You can also hold down the space bar, and what you'll get is a little hand. It's waving, and that will allow you to pan left and right also. So you can, if you get kind of handy with it, you can zoom in and out and do all sorts of fun things. I'm going to zoom in on the paper a little bit, pan it over to center it on the screen more or less, so that we can see what we're doing. Now let's draw a few objects. Our basic drawing tools are over here in the menu bar here, the toolbar. And the pen seems like a good place to start. I'll just click on that. And you can click, and what you'll see is a bunch of lines start to form. If you click and drag, what you'll see is a curve start to form. That's called a Bezier point. And you can mix straight points with curved points. And we can come back and edit these later. If you go back to where you started, you can complete the shape. If you don't do that and you want to stop, just hit escape, and that will end the line or line segments. And if you remember from AutoCAD, this is very similar to a polyline. You can use the the selection tool here, which looks like a hollow arrow, and select the object by just clicking on it. And then you can click and drag to move it around. You can also nudge it just by tapping the arrow keys. So now that we've drawn our shape, we can come in and edit it. There are a bunch of editing tools available under the pen tool. If you just click and drag with your left mouse button, you'll see the menu. Or, by the way, you can also right-click. I know you can't see me right-clicking, but I am right-clicking. And choose different tools. For example, I can add an anchor point. I could also tap the plus sign, by the way, if you're in the tool, and that will do it. You just have to make sure to click on one of the line segments here. If you click off of it, you'll get a little menu, little pop-up menu that says, you messed up. You missed the path that we have created. You can also delete these anchor points. Again, same process. Right-click on the tool, and you can come in, click on an anchor point, and you'll see that it gets deleted, like so. And there's a very similar tool to the pen tool. It's called the curvature tool. And you see how we got these Bezier curves here? Well, we can draw with a tool that basically only draws Bezier curves. And this is handy if you're, I don't know, illustrating a face or something like that. You can see that it completes the curve when I draw a continuous loop, and it completes it with another Bezier point. To move these objects around, there is the selection tool. You can also tap a V on the keyboard. And I would recommend those of you who are good at remembering keyboard shortcuts to start remembering these, because they do kind of save you time. You have to do something with your other hand while you are working, and you're not supposed to be drinking or eating in class, so why not just leave it on the keyboard? Anyway, I'll just click on that tool. If I have an object that I've already been working on, you see it gets selected. I can also click on another object and it gets highlighted with a bounding box. And if I hold down Shift, I can add things to the selection. And clicking again on an object with Shift held down removes it from the selection set. Then it's just a matter of moving the object around to where you want it. Obviously, objects can overlap. You can see here when they overlap, objects are solid. Now, why are they solid? Well, let's talk about some object properties. And the basic properties are fill and stroke. And fill and stroke are quite simple. Fill sounds like just like what it is. And up here on my toolbar, my sort of options bar, you can see there's a solid white box. And I'll leave my mouse over it so you can see it. And you can choose a color right there. And this whole menu can drop down. You can see how you can just click on a color to change it. There also are some patterns in here that you can choose. And we'll talk about further colors and patterns in a second. The next box over is the stroke menu. And when you click on that, again, clicking on the down arrow, you'll see a very similar little box of colors and patterns. And yes, those change the color of the line. So the outline is the stroke. And remember that fill patterns do not have to have a continuous, or I guess contiguous, line to loop to form a fill. They can fill objects that are only partially full. Clicking on the pen tool, I can start to draw a bunch of lines, and you see how it's trying to fill in even though I haven't actually drawn a completed loop. And with this selection tool available, you'll see there are these little boxes, these sort of grips that you can use to reshape objects. And this is very similar to kind of most pieces of software. And these grips also, if you mouse over the edge of the grip, you'll see that the handles that you can move the object. One interesting thing about patterns in Adobe Illustrator is that they can contain what's called an alpha channel, which is a transparency channel, which basically means there's nothing there. And so I can see through my line, and here it's a little grayed out because there is a kind of hollow section, but it has a little bit of fill pattern to it. Whereas here, and again, I'm using my scroll tools, the space bar and the holding down the alt bar and scrolling to see things. Here it's totally clear. So you can develop patterns with all sorts of different complexities quite simply. These editing tools are, of course, quite blunt, but they do allow you to rather quickly generate different parts of your drawing. I'm going to go down here, and you can control your zoom of your screen just by clicking on a number. I'm just going to fit everything on the screen. Sometimes this is really nice just to be able to see, like, where am I? And then I'm going to hold down the Alt button and scroll in. Now, what if you want to edit some little bits and pieces of these drawings that you've created, these paths? Then you can use what's called the Direct Selection tool. And you can use this on any path. So you click the Direct Selection tool, and each path, the grips, the handles will show up. Let me zoom in on this object here so you can see the Bezier points a little more clearly. Each one of these, if you move your mouse over the point, the sort of center point, and click on it to select it, you can then move the point. You can also, once it's selected, grab the Bezier points and change the angle. This is great if you want someone to go from, say, a smile to a frown. You can, if you're drawing a face, you can drag these up and down and modify them to really get some subtle control over these objects. Obviously, objects that are straight, just click on the point to modify it, and it's quite easy to drag it around. You can also convert this point to a curved point. Let me just zoom in on this a little bit, and you should see a tiny, tiny little dot next to that handle. I know it is kind of small for our screen, but if you click on that dot and drag it, you see how it will turn that square point into a curvature point with two Bezier points. And what this will do is the Bezier points are going to be completely equal geometrically, which basically makes a curved space. So for example, if I drew a box, I could turn it into a circle. The other big drawing tool here is the rectangle tool, and I'll right click on it to show you the other associated tools: rounded rectangle, ellipses, polygons. These are basically ready-made paths in different shapes. I'll just click on the tool and draw on it. And you see here that it becomes a quite simple shape. It does have these same corner elements. The trick here is that when you drag them in, it will turn it basically into a polygon here rather than or a rounded rectangle, I guess, depending on the object. Then once it's created, it can of course be modified using any of these grips. And you can even come in with the Direct Selection tool and modify individual points like we did before. Now, if you don't like some of the shapes you've drawn, there are, some different options. One is you can just use the Selection tool, select it and delete it, or the Direct Selection tool and delete little anchor points. Or you can use the Eraser tool. Now, the Eraser tool is a little funky. It is based on the size of the brush, and it will erase basically opacity. So initially it's just going to erase everything with a 5-point round brush. So if I click and drag with my cursor, it will erase what's there, but strangely enough, it will leave kind of a trail through it. And I can actually slice off an object by slicing right through it. And if I hold down the Alt button, that same 5-point rectangle or a circle becomes a rectangle that I can click and drag and draw through an object and kind of slice it apart. And when you select these objects, they are now kind of independent of each other. Now, there are two little mini tools hiding underneath the Eraser tool. One is the Scissors tool, and what this allows you to do is remove part of your path. You have to click on the path itself, and what you'll end up with is a segment that you've created. I've just clicked twice, and then I can hit delete, and that segment goes away. And what's cool about that is we can still control fill patterns, for example, but it doesn't always have to have a segment all the way around it. And this is handy in certain situations. The other tool, by the way, is the knife tool, just go here and click the knife tool. And with that one, when you slice through an object, and you can draw a path, just clicking and dragging in this case, what you'll see is that it has actually split the object, and it's still one path. They're just kind of joined together. So I can come in and grab individual Bezier points and click on them to make them hot. I'm not sure which one I've got here, if I've got the top or the bottom, but you can see here there's two different kind of segments now. They can be independently edited. I could have moved one part away or not. There's all sorts of different tools that you can have available, but this is a nice way if you have an object that you want to split up. And if you want to delete half of it, this is also a nice way. Just hit the delete button. Now, if you didn't want to do that, you can use the universal keyboard shortcut Control-Z. If you did decide that you want to do that, you can use Control-Shift-Z, and that will redo the undo. And those are my two favorite keys by all means. Those are also under the pull-down menus, in case you were wondering, under the Edit pull-down menu. Finally, if you've got some shapes and you want to quickly copy them, just hold down the Alt button while you've got the object selected and click and drag, and you can make any number of copies of that object. You see how they show up on top of the previous objects. If you want to change that drawing order, just right click on them and choose Arrange, and you can either send it backward or send it to the back, which will send it all the way to the back of the stack, as opposed to just sending it behind the object that it's directly on top of. So just to finish up with our review, let's talk about some editing tools. And there are all sorts of different editing tools, as you might imagine. I'm going to select a whole bunch of paths that I created. And one of the ones that's really fun is this one here called the Shape Builder. And I'll just click on it. And what you can do, if you click on an area of overlap, it will create a new little piece there. So I could create several little ovally kind of strange shapes. I guess your Venn diagram can be really exploded that way. If you click and drag, what it will do is add those shapes. So you can really kind of end up joining a whole lot of different parts to create one overall bubbly shape. And this is great for building up objects. An alternative to this is using one of the myriad tools here under the window menu. These are much more kind of advanced tools than we can get off of the buttons. I'll call up the Pathfinder tool, and this guy here, I'll just zoom in on it a little bit. There are a number of different paths that you can find. Basically, if you look at them, some will kind of join shapes together into one overall outline. Some will subtract them or look for the difference. Sometimes it just requires a little bit of experimentation to find what you're looking for. And I'll just come here and I'll select them, and I'll choose this one that divides. And you can see how all of my selected objects, I'm just going to deselect, try and grab one of them. They're all individual pieces now. They're all kind of broken out into parts. Whereas if I have them selected and I click the Merge tool, they'll merge them into one block. Now you see when I did that, it somehow got rid of the stroke. I don't know why. So I'm going to come in here and I'll make my stroke 1 point. And point is a measure of publishing kind of dimension that they use a lot. You'll see it in your fonts. And that is what you'll get when you click the outline tool. So again, each of these tools, they do something similar, but sometimes you'll find that one tool works better to the other. The hardest part is coming up with the thing you want to draw. And then once you've done that, it's just a matter of finding a tool that will get you there. There are also a number of tools hiding here in your toolbar, kind of under the width tool, the warp tool, twirl tool. These are really fun tools. I find that I don't actually always have a lot of control of them, or at least they don't seem to do what I always want. But I'll show you what some of them do. The width tool, if you click and drag on a individual anchor point, you can modify the width of that line depending on the settings of the tool. So I can come up with a kind of fun, I don't know, bubbly, smiley, I don't know how you'd even describe it. But anyway, that's one sort of tool. The other really fun thing we can do is play around with text. And I find that Illustrator has really very nice text tools. you can just click on the text tool and either click to insert or draw a box, and you'll see your usual text choice tools. You can choose whichever ones you like, and of course you can make it a different size, and these are things you can change afterwards, of course. But I'll just draw a box. It will fill in the text if you haven't put any in there. You can also paste in text. I've pasted in something which already has formatting from Microsoft Word. In fact, you can even link Word documents if you prefer working in that and want to do page layout in Illustrator. You can link them in here. That's much better to do in InDesign, but it's an option. And you can even, using the text tool, there are fun ways to draw other types of text. For example, I'm just going to click the down arrow here and choose Type on a Path tool. And then you can click on a path and it will put the text in there. And it can be either a straight path or a rectilinear path. And like before, you can paste in your text if you want. Here it is. You can change its size. So if you want it to, I guess I better select it all. I'll do Control A to select it all and change the size of it this way. Make it a little smaller. And what's fun about this, if you find these things sorts of things fun, is that I can still come back in and modify the path. The path still exists, and I'll just make each of these Bezier points kind of hot as a joint, and then modify it in a quite dramatic way. You can even put text into a shape. I'm just going to click on the text tool, but click on this shape and again paste in as need be, modify everything. I'll change the size so it fits in here a little bit better. And you can even add. One thing to notice, however, I'll just zoom in on this a little bit, is that there's a tiny little plus sign, little red plus sign in the lower right. That means there's actually more text in the text that we're not seeing. You can just click on that and you'll end up with a, I don't know what you'd call it, the continued text cursor. And like magic, it will draw it in a new text box, which has all the same modification tools. And if we come in and, I don't know, increase the font, for example, you see how it selects everything, even in the linked box, and it will automatically kind of scroll it into the next box, just depending on the size of your text. Anytime you have an object that you have selected using the select tool or even the direct selection tool, there are a number of interesting options available. I can just right click on the object and a menu pops up, a context sensitive menu with all sorts of different options. And this is a great way to draw really in any program. But for us, the transform menu is great. You can move, rotate, reflect, shear objects. So if I choose move, for example, what you can do, you can select this preview button, and it will preview exactly how far you're going. You can change the numbers, make this 3 points, and make this, I don't know, 10 points. And by changing it, it will obviously give you the nice preview. You can see what exactly is going to happen. And most of these toolbar buttons, by the way, are here under the pull-down menus. Just go to the Object pull-down menu when you have that object selected. And there's a number of different things. So, for example, when we were adding or subtracting anchor points, we can find that here. There are a few options in here that you won't see in other menus. For instance, the envelope distort button. I like this one. You can make an object and then kind of warp it. And this is really handy if you want to, here, let's see, we'll make a warp like this. If you have sort of, I don't know, a really irregular kind of way that you want an object to distort. So you'll get these little anchor points that you can modify with kind of great specificity. And if there is some sort of pattern or something in here, it will warp that too. So this is a great way to kind of come up with some super sophisticated warping. And then once it's done, you can go back to the envelope distort menu and choose expand, and it will basically just get rid of that mesh you drew and just make it into the permanent. The notion of expanding some sort of path type of object. This can be applied in any number of situations. For example, I have some text here. I'm just going to get the properties of the text, and just by clicking on the properties button in the upper right. And then you can expand this to, instead of being a text object, I'm going to just click Create Outlines, and it will convert it into paths. And what's cool about that is you can now come in and sort of select individual pieces, you can modify them, and of course now all the bits and pieces are available, all the anchor points. So you can really kind of tweak things to look the way. Let's take this rabbit picture that I found on the internet, and I want to convert this to something I can manipulate in Adobe Illustrator. So I'm going to use the image trace button here. This is on the properties menu. I'll just click that, and there's a number of different options. I'm just going to go with a silhouette, which is basically what this is. And if the tracing looks good, I don't need any further options. I'll just click the expand button. It's either up on the options bar or down here. What that will do is that gives me lines and strokes. So I can come in here, I can change the fill color to some color or nothing, and I can change the stroke color to black. If that effect isn't dramatic enough for you, you can call up the whole library. Just go to the window pull-down menu and choose brushes, and you'll see a whole handy-dandy library with a swatch of each type. And then you can just select the line. And these are the ones that are in the model or in the drawing. If you want even more, you can go and click the little 3-4 lines of other menu indicator. And I'll just choose, let's try, I don't know, image bristle brushes. Choose that. And you get the library. Now this is basically what's installed on your computer. These are outside of your drawing, so you can load them into your drawing. And to do that, you actually just select your path and then double click on the line type that you want. And you see here it shows up in my project. And each of these brushes has its own settings. So for example, if I change the dimension of the line down to half a point instead of a full point, you can see that actually looks a little nicer. It's just gonna vary depending on the types of lines that you choose. And these libraries are great, by the way. I'm gonna close this one and go to my swatches menu. These are the colors that are in the project, and there is a swatches library, or series of libraries actually, and you can choose different ones. Food here, let's go with vegetables. It seems very healthy. I'll make these icons a little bit larger, and what these are kind of color schemes that you can load into your project. You just drag the folder into your swatches library, and then you can apply those to different objects. So for example, my rabbit, if I choose the fill colors, I will now find that my different colors are available, the whole broccoli menu, which seems very appropriate for rabbits. They probably like broccoli. Okay, enough reviewing tools. Let's actually do the project. And the project is to create a board talking about our artist that we are designing a gallery for. And first of all, the units of this document, the default units, are actually in points. And you may have noticed that in a few of the menus, including the information bar. The way to change that to something a little more familiar is you go to the File pull-down menu, choose Document Setup, and in that you can tell it, please use inches. And of course you can use feet and inches, yards, all that kind of stuff, but I'll just hit OK. The other concept that we need to know about is something called Artboards. And there is an Artboard tool here. We can click on that, and that allows us to click and drag and change the size of this particular artboard. And in fact, if you double click on this, it brings up a menu where you can label it. So we'll call this Chihuly board. And we can actually set the size of it right here. I can make it 17 inches wide and 11 high, which is exactly what I want. Now we can place our images in here very easily using the File, Place option, or Control-Shift-P. And since we do it a lot, it's actually handy to be able to go and use that quickly. Anyway, I've got a picture of the artist, and I've got a couple of different photos that I can use of his artwork. And I'm not exactly sure what the board is going to look like yet, but I'd like to have at least 4 different photos, maybe one of his larger works, and a couple of his smaller works here. I'll just add them in. You can also typically link back to the original file. It's not absolutely necessary. And in this case, I think I'll leave it as is because I'm not going to be changing these images. But if you are planning to either collaborate with somebody where they're editing the images, or you think you might be manipulating the images to, say, enhance the color or something like that, you would link back. Anyway, I also usually show import options. It's not super important for just bringing in an image, but if you are working with scaled drawings, you will want to do that. And then each one you can import one by one just by clicking and dragging. You can also click and it will import it at the original resolution, and I actually prefer that. See how these are different even though these are all about the same resolution. That way I don't accidentally make the image larger than its native resolution. And what I mean by that is you can see how some of these are much bigger, some of these are smaller. Each of those has a native resolution where it will look good. If you stretch it any larger than it imports in this method, it will probably look a little dotty. And you'll want to go and resize these images a bit. By the way, in Illustrator, when you stretch using these grips, it is in kind of freehand stretch. It will change the proportions. So use Shift to lock those proportions so that they don't get distorted. There are a number of ways that you can align the drawings that you kind of end up with. Obviously, you can just click and drag them to move them around, but that's a little random. We actually want to be a little more precise. First of all, if you select, say, two objects and you go to the Properties menu, you will see there's a whole Align menu. So, for example, I can click these and they will align with each other vertically or along an edge. This is super handy, especially as you go and lay out several objects that you absolutely want them to be aligned with each other. In fact, there's a whole Align menu which I will align myself with, which allows you to do all sorts of other fun things, distribute the spacing along an even amount, that kind of. Another one that's real handy is to have a grid. You can just choose View, Show Grid, and then View, Snap to Grid. And then your objects will start to snap to this very precise grid, and it's a great way to align objects that are way on different parts of the sheet when you don't always know where you're going with it. It's also very nice to have these aligned along the edges of the drawing as well. Another common way to align your objects is to use the rulers. I'm going to go to the View menu again, choose Show Rulers. You could also do Control R. And then if I click and drag on one of these rulers, I can set reference lines based on actual measurements, which is super handy because then you can select your objects and kind of snap them right against those rulers. We can use many of the tools we already discussed to lay out the board, including having text that I basically got from Wikipedia. Obviously, you'll want to put references for everything you have collected, and I can use these text boxes to adjust the text and kind of get the board to all fit in its required location. Remember, each of them is kind of independent, but also linked, so it's awfully handy that way. Finally, I'll look in my borders library to find a border that I think will work. Oh, here's some old style stained glass. Won't that look nice? Let me just make it a tad smaller. It's a little bit aggressive. Finally, you will want to step back from the board and make sure that it's as balanced and well designed as possible. I probably should squeeze my name in here somewhere. And I don't really like that if you look at the negative space, there's a lot of empty space right over here. So I think I'll probably change out that image. I also want to leave some space for my logo. To make a logo, first we need somewhere to put the logo. And what I like to do here, I don't want to draw it right on top of this. I want to create it as a separate artboard. And the reason is that I may want to import it into other drawings, or maybe I'm doing my board in some other program, something like InDesign, which for this project is not allowed, but in other projects you'll want to be able to bring that in. So how do you make a new artboard? Well, there is the Artboard tool. I could just select this one and copy it, but I'm going to call up the whole Artboards menu. And this gives me an opportunity to make a new artboard just by clicking plus. And what's nice about that is I can click on the symbol here and give it a name, call it Chihuly logo. And I can give it a size 6 by 6, seems reasonable to me. And there you go. You got a little spot that you can go to. And just double click on the name here and it will zoom into the fill your screen with that particular art. Now I do want to kind of use one of his great looking bowls here as a logo, and you know, I could trace this. I could come in and use the curvature tool and really try to follow along the edges, but I hate to say it, but therein lies misery, because that's going to take a long time. And maybe I can get the outline using the image trace feature I showed before. So you just select the image, choose Window, Image Trace, and except I didn't quite get it there, and choose an option which will hopefully convert it to lines or paths that are filled with the colors of the original. I'm going to fiddle around with the settings, see what I can find. And this can take quite a while, which is why I sped that up. And you can see I've got a pretty good result here. And you do want to make sure that you have this preview button checked. You also want to make sure that you expose this advanced option here. I can simplify the drawing quite a lot by using some of these sliders, or make it more complicated. Now, I just want something that's an icon that's simple to print, so that's why I went with fewer colors. And once you've got the result, just click Expand, and now I've got a series of areas that I can manipulate in my drawing. Now, one thing you can do, you don't have to, of course, but I'm going to go and I want to recolor this. I wanted to go with a green color scheme with my project, and you can actually do that quite easily. Just click on the Properties menu, and I know these are all big menus, but there is a button down here that says Recolor. And this works when you have multiple colors. If you don't have multiple colors, it doesn't really work all that well. But anyway, I did earlier bring in that broccoli color scheme, and I can choose to recolor everything, or I can also pick colors that I don't want, or that I do want to change by modifying it here. There are a few other fun things that you can do with logos. One that I like to think about is taking this base image, which is okay, and adding some fun effects to it. I'm going to go to the Effects pull-down menu, and let's add a blur is a fun one. I'm going to add some blur. I'll choose Gaussian blur, and you can see that a menu pops up, and you can choose kind of how blurry this thing gets. And those of you who wear glasses, you can just take your glasses off and get the same effect. But anyway, again, I have the preview button selected. If it's not selected, you won't see the changes. Click OK. Now, I'm clicking off of that, and that's a little too blurry for my tastes. So maybe I'll make a copy of this original and remove the blur from that copy. To do that, you just select it, right-click on it, and choose Transform, Move. Strangely enough, there isn't a copy button. It's a little mysterious that way. And what I'll want to do, I'm going to make a copy and make it go vertically 2 inches. So it goes up above. Oh, except maybe I'll make that -2, so it goes up above. And then if I click the copy button, you'll see, oh, look, I have 2 of them now. Now this copy, when I click on it and get its properties, you'll see that effect actually shows up in the menu bar as an item, which I can then delete. And that's a quick way to kind of make experiments or apply other filters. Then I can just move this guy back into place and change its effects further. And you know, that looks okay, but maybe I'll make it a little less than 100% opaque so it blends in with some of the blurriness. And there we go. I have a nice looking logo. Lastly, you can add some fun things like other filters. If I go to the Effects pull-down menu, there are sort of Photoshop style filters. They're called SVG filters. And let's try a shadow filter. This might add a little bit of a drop shadow. Just tends to give your drawings a tiny bit of depth. I think I'm going to put in some text in here too, and maybe apply some effects to that text. Now that we've created a logo in a separate artboard, we can import that and export that easily into other views of the project. Let me just crop down this board a little bit. To do that, I can use the Artboard tool, click on the artboard I want to crop, and it's probably a good idea to leave out as much of the white space as possible. Now when we import it into other views or projects, we can crop that away, but this is handy. And now what I'm going to do is show you how to import it into your same drawing. I'm just going to choose Place. And here's my Adobe Illustrator file. I'm going to link back to the original. Now, of course, this is a little bit circular because this is the same document, but that's okay. I'll choose Place, and you can choose which artboard you want to use just by scrolling through the list. Now I only have 2 here, but sometimes you'll find you have a lot. You can also choose to crop it in different ways, including cropping it to the artwork. I'm going to go with trimming it, which leaves it on the board, and click OK. Now when I place it, I could just click to place it at the original size, but I can resize it just by clicking and dragging to make the image whatever size I want. And what's nice about this is I can come in here, stretch it. It's just an object in my board, and maybe I'll add another drawing in here. It looks a little empty to me. And then what happens is if you make a change to this drawing, I'll just delete the, or I'll edit the text ever so slightly. What you'll see is that when you save that original drawing, the updated drawing will give you an error message saying, hey, you need to and here's the error message that pops up. It says some files have been modified. So when I click yes, it will update it to whatever the new version is. Now, this is handy enough here where I may want to have the logo in several places, and that's fine if you want to do that. And then it will update each one as you make changes to the original logo. This is so handy in many different circumstances, but using a logo is the easiest. So any last changes to your board, this is the time to do them as you're looking at the overall design of it. Maybe you want some overlaps, and maybe you want to put some borders around some of the images. Occasionally that looks nice if you don't like the blended in with the background look. You can't do it directly. You have to click the mask button, and then once you do that, you can come in, add a stroke and a line color, or even a brush, and you'll end up with a nice border. And there you have it. You have yourself a nice board describing the artist and their artwork, and you have created a logo that represents your new gallery.